Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Recovery Talk. I hope you're all doing good. Life has been testing me lately, not gonna lie. But hey, character development. Anyways, guys, so one thing that I wanted to make an episode and talk a bit about today is about increasing calories and recovery. Why should you increase your intake? The reason why I want to talk about this is because it's something I see come up with clients over and over and over and over. Basically, why should I increase my intake in recovery? Why? Why? It just terrifies me. Why would I do something so scary? What are the benefits? What is the reason? So I thought I'd try in this episode to talk a bit about the benefits of increasing your calorie intake in recovery. See, it's a bit of a tricky one to talk about, like calories and intake, right? Because on one hand, we always say, an eating disorder is not just about the food or the calories and blah, blah, blah. You can eat more but not be recovered, etc., etc., etc. And that is true. That is completely true. Someone can increase their intake without necessarily being fully recovered. But please don't make the whole, it's not about the food thing mean that food is not part of the healing journey. Because yes, it is about the food too. We can't just say that, because an eating disorder is not just about food, we just completely ignore that bit. Because an eating disorder is about food as well, and food is a key part of recovery. I think sometimes in certain spaces within, certain spaces in psychology or therapy or even online spaces, some people may have misconstructed the whole thing that, it's not just about the food, to mean that it's not about food at all, so let's not focus on it. And thinking that if you're talking to someone with an eating disorder, if you just find some kind of root issue, root trauma and fix that, then magically the food would just be fine. And yeah, I mean, it is true that people with eating disorder can sometimes, use food as a way to kind of gain control and blah, blah, all of these things. Yeah, there could be some truth to that. But we also cannot deny that food is a key part of an eating disorder, and that the state of undernourishment creates some symptoms as well that maintains and strengthens the eating disorder. I probably have said this before, but when I started my own recovery many years ago now, like almost 10 years ago, can you believe it? Thankfully, my treatment team, they were very like, yeah, we do need to focus on the food as well because you're undernourished. And if we just ignore the food and just sit there and talk, we're not really going to get anywhere because you're undernourished and your brain is not fully there yet, right? So that is why I think focusing on the food and focusing on refeeding is a key part. I tend to see recovery as like a bit of a step process, right? Where you kind of take one step at a time. And I think that especially in the earlier stages of recovery, you need to focus on actual refeeding before you can start just doing a bunch of trauma work, right? I'm not saying those two can't coexist, but what I'm saying is that if you do a bunch of, work on your, past experiences, other, like your living situation, other mental health issues, this is helpful and good work, but if you're not refeeding, then you're not going to get the full benefits of recovery. And equally, as I will talk about in this episode, if you're refeeding but not sufficiently, you're also not going to get the full benefits of recovery. So why increase your intake in recovery? Very often, what I hear from clients is something along the lines of, okay, well, I'm eating now. Why would I increase my intake? I will just feel more scared. Maybe I will gain more weight and it will go faster and I'll freak out. And why? Why would I do that to myself? Why? I don't see any reason to it. And here's the thing. You couldn't have been more wrong. Because increasing your intake, even though in the moments you're doing it, might feel more scary. Long term, it gives you more relief. First of all, one thing I see very often when I work with people with eating disorder is that their eating disorder will always find a reason why it's not the right time to increase, right? So someone who is in the earlier stages of their recovery will argue that, well, it's too early for me to start increasing. I need to be comfortable eating this lower amount, right? And don't get me wrong, there is a point in recovery where increasing too much too soon can be bad. And that is when someone is in risk of refeeding syndrome, right? Where if you were to increase too quickly without any medical supervision and just, that could create some medical complications. But when you're outside of that danger zone, there is no reason as to why doing it as slowly as possible. And then People who are a little bit further ahead in recovery, they will also argue that they can't increase because they should have done it earlier, right? And it's so interesting. And sometimes you can even hear this within the same person. On one hand, they're like, oh, it's too soon for me to increase. And then they also be like, oh, but it's also too late for me to increase, right? Almost jumping between the two of them. This is such an interesting thing with an eating disorder, is that people tend to jump from one kind of extreme to another, right? You will have the same person thinking they are too sick and too broken to ever recover, and then the next minute they're suddenly like, oh well, I don't really even have an eating disorder, right? So you jump from denial to thinking you're too sick, not sick enough to too sick, right? So I think just one thing to be aware of when it comes to increasing your intake is that your eating disorder is not going to have any good reasons to do it. Your eating disorder is going to find a very, very, your head, good reason why increasing is good for everyone but you, right? But this is the unicorn syndrome creeping up. And you know, I've spoken about the unicorn syndrome in a past episode titled The Unicorn Syndrome, and how the eating disorder tends to make you seem like you are unique from the rules, like you are a unicorn, and the rules of recovery applies to everyone but you. But there is no such thing as unicorns, right? You're not a unicorn, and that's important to remember here. I don't think I have ever spoken to a client who was fully ready to increase and was like, yeah, I'm so ready for this, with no hesitation. And I also don't think I've ever spoken to a client who haven't had some kind of reason why they should kind of, hold off a little bit. It was always some reason. Always. I've heard pretty much every reason in the book. And like I said, the reasons would be contradictory. Like, for instance, no, it's too soon. Oh, it's too late. No, I'm gaining too slow. I'm gaining too fast. All of these things would be used as reasons why not to increase. And I just want to say there is no such thing as eating too much in recovery, and there's no such thing as gaining too fast in recovery. So let's kind of get into the reasons as to why increasing is so important. So the thing with an eating disorder, right? When you're someone who's undernourished, you might be under your natural set point weight range, your body is going to prioritize weight gain regardless. Your body is going to fight to gain weight. Perhaps the only exception would be when your metabolism speeds up a lot, when you actually are eating more, then you might notice that you actually have to fight to gain weight. But that is something I'll come back to a bit later. This is essentially called hypermetabolism, and it's a phenomenon that tends to happen with some people who do increase their intake. But anyways, what I mean is that when you are someone who's undernourished, potentially underweight relative to your set point weight, you can technically so-called weight restore and quote-unquote recover eating a lower intake, right? Someone can be in recovery and eat only like 2,000 calories, which is a very, very low recovery intake, and still, gain weight. And that often make a person think that is just proves that is just what they need, right? Then it's like, well, if I'm gaining weight on 2,000, why on earth would I need to increase, right? The reason why you're gaining weight on 2,000 is because you are undernourished and your body is potentially under its set point weight, so it is prioritizing weight gain regardless. It's kind of like a person who's completely broke. They're still probably gonna eat, right? They're still probably gonna go and get some food, but the food they eat won't be their preferred food. Instead of having a nice meal, they would probably maybe just grab some noodles instead of having that lovely meal out on a restaurant that they actually wanted, right? And with this, I tend to say that recovering on a higher amount of calories is like recovery plus. It's like the premium version of recovery, because you get a lot of added benefits. The weight gain is probably going to happen anyways, right? You can gain weight eating a lower intake, but then you will get the weight gain, which is super important, right? But you won't necessarily get all the added benefits. And what are these benefits? So there are many of them, but one of them is increased metabolism, right? Having a metabolism that is actually up and going, functioning, and that is a nice thing to have, right? This can be a tricky one, because sometimes I hear people in eating disorder recovery who want their metabolism to be high so that they don't gain weight easily, and so that they, there's like some kind of fear of weight gain going into their desire of having a higher metabolism. So I just want to call that out. But at the end of the day, having a metabolism that's working as it should be, that is a nice thing to have. Being metabolically suppressed is not a pleasant thing. It's not good for your body or brain. But your metabolism can't speed up just randomly. It speeds up by being given more food, right? Given more energy to run. In the same way that I mentioned the person who's completely broke, they actually need the money if they're going to go out and have a nice meal at a restaurant, right? And think of it as calories are your body's money, right? It is your body's currency. And the more you give, the more your body can, spend that money on nice luxury things such as increasing your metabolism. If you are interested in learning more about metabolism, I have done an episode on metabolism. So do check that out. It's literally just called metabolism. Where I explain a bit more in depth how metabolism works in a simplified way, right? Because I understand it can seem complex, all of these things, and I also understand that a lot of people with eating disorder will be 100% convinced that their metabolism is broken. I'm debunking that in the metabolism episode I've done previously. Your metabolism is not broken, your metabolism is suppressed. Those are two very separate, different things. And your metabolism is going to stay suppressed until you give it enough energy to get out of that deficit, right? Your metabolism is not going to just randomly go up when you haven't given it energy to it. Your metabolism is adapting to a period of famine by conserving energy. And because weight gain is such an essential thing, it will prioritize it regardless, right? In the same way, if someone is very, very broke, food is such an essential thing that they will still eat, but they won't necessarily eat the food that they really wanted to, right? They're not going to get the luxury meal. They're going to get like the cup noodles. Even though cup noodles is really good, to be honest. I love cup noodles, but you get what I mean, right? So another few benefits that I notice in my clients when they're increasing their intake, right? This is kind of based on, of course, there's science backing this up, but it's also very much based on also what I see with clients, right? And one thing that they tend to explain is that they just feel a sense of like, they feel a bit freer, like a bit less rigid, right? They just feel more free and less rigid. And this can be surprising because it's not necessarily that they have actively decided to challenge your rigidity. Of course, this is important as well. You need to do that as well. But actually just the increase in itself and being in a higher energy intake can actually lessen some rigidity because undernourishment and rigidity are quite closely connected. Another thing that quite a few of my clients have reported when they're increasing their intake is they sleep better and they're less irritable. Their mood is better, right? Please note that this can fluctuate, and if someone enters hypermetabolism, they might notice that their sleep get a little bit disturbed because you might get night sweats, and that can really like wake you up. You're waking up and you're feeling quite sweaty. But overall, it seems like the body is just kind of getting out of that like survival state, and it's kind of like relaxing, right? And another thing that is a massive paradox, and again, people do not believe me, or like clients do not believe me when I explain this. They believe me, but they believe that applies to everyone but them, right? Is that actually by increasing your intake in recovery, very often what eventually happens is that your weight gain actually slows down. I know you're going to be like, no, that just goes against basic science, right? But here's the thing, when you're working with a energy suppressed person, then the rules of calories in and calories out are very, very different. If your metabolism is severely suppressed and you actually increase your intake, then the metabolism speeds up. And then what can happen is the metabolism speeds up so highly that you need a lot of food just to restore weight. This does not mean that you're at your set point weight, by the way. It just means that you're in hypermetabolism. I've had so many clients where we start off and they are starting off and they're increasing their intake and they're on a very low intake, let's say 2,000 calories, and they are gaining weight. And they're just like, well, see, the recovery is not for me, my metabolism is broken, blah, blah, blah. But then somehow there is a part of them that like resilient part of them that decides to go for it, right? And of course I'm pushing as well. And then they keep increasing. And then they're like, wait, my weight gain has slowed down. What is going on? And then I will also have clients who are eating a lot more than they ever did. And they are noticing that the weight gain just stops, or they might even lose weight. I want to highlight that I'm not saying that this is a benefit. Because weight gain is not a negative, right? It's not like, yay, no weight gain. That is a benefit of increasing your intake. Please note, this is not what I'm saying. The increased metabolism is a benefit because it's a sign you're no longer metabolically suppressed. But I'm saying this because it is essentially debunking the whole thing of, if you eat very little in recovery, then you're not going to gain weight. And if you eat more in recovery, your weight is just going to shoot up, right? So that's what I'm saying it, just to kind of debunk that eating disorder belief. Because again, as I said earlier, your body is going to prioritize weight gain whether you eat restrictively in recovery or whether you are giving it enough in recovery. Your body is going to prioritize weight gain regardless, right? So it's kind of up to you how you want to do it. Do you want to do it the premium way where you get the added benefits of feeling more free, fixing your metabolism, etc., etc.? Or do you want to do it when you're still feeling rigid, you're still metabolically suppressed, right? But as you can see, it's pretty, like, objectively, you can see it's a pretty good deal to just eat more and get the added benefit. Of course, the downside of eating more is that it feels scary, but let's kind of flip that. So fear in recovery is actually a good thing, right? If you feel scared and uncomfortable, that's a sign that you're pushing forward. So is it even a disadvantage that you're feeling anxious and scared and uncomfortable? Because that is essentially, in recovery, it's a good thing. Another thing that I want to talk about as a benefit of increasing your intake is if you are someone who normally menstruates, who have lost your period from your eating disorder, then actually eating a proper amount can help you get your period back as well. Some people, again, not all, there are some people who never have a period to start with because they're someone who don't menstruate, or they're someone who never lost their period, you know. I don't want to, because again, that period thing, I don't want to make that as a seem like someone is like, oh yeah, well, that doesn't apply to me, so then I can just keep restricting, right? But this is for the people who normally menstruate, who have lost their period and who have not gotten it back and are trying to get it back. Some people who are eating more in recovery than eating enough to gain weight, but then not eating enough to fully heal, they will typically be weight restored, and then they still wouldn't have gotten their period back, right? Or they will have maybe gotten their period back, but they have period trouble, like irregular, weird periods, and they don't seem to, for instance, they might have bleedings but not ovulations, right? And this can be stressful because someone can be like, yeah, but I'm like quote unquote weight restored, but I don't have my period. What's going on? What am I doing wrong? And here's the thing. Have your body been given enough energy to actually fix this? So often people don't realize just how much energy it takes to repair the damage of an eating disorder, right? You're not just restoring weight. Yes, that is an important thing, and that is what the body will eventually prioritize, especially early on. That is the high priority for the body, right? But you are also repairing a lot of damage. So an example that I recently used to my clients is that when someone has a severe like burn injury, they need to eat a lot more calories to repair that injury because the body needs the energy to repair, right? Just like the light in our house runs on electricity, that is energy, right? And calories is literally just another word for energy, right? Why do you fear energy? Energy is what keeps things going. And in the same way that someone who's had a severe burn injury need more energy because they need to fix it, and that fixing runs on energy, right? In the same way, if you're someone with an eating disorder who have been, undernourished and created damage to your body, you need energy to repair that damage. So when you're eating more in recovery, yes, you are restoring weight, but you're also getting the nice added bonus of, for instance, restoring your bone density if you're someone with a lower bone density, restoring your hormonal health. This is regardless of gender or sex. Hormones can really go out of whack with an eating disorder, whether you're someone who menstruates or not. Also restoring things such as hair growth, skin, nails, all of these like luxury things that your body can't really do on a very lower amount. Yeah, it might be better, but you won't get that optimum recovery in health. And also things such as, your digestive system. So what is very common with eating disorder is that your digestion gets quite messed up because you have so little energy coming in that you don't have enough energy to keep your digestive system running smoothly, right? So when you're actually increasing your intake, you're also giving your body energy to repair your digestive system. And when it comes to digestion and recovery, it can get worse before better. And this also goes with things such as like hair and nails. A lot of people notice that when they start recovery, they seem to be losing more hair, right? Or they start recovery and their digestive system seems to be even worse. This does not mean that recovery is not working. It just means that sometimes it gets worse before better, and what you're experiencing is actually a delayed reaction to the eating disorder. It's reflecting the damage that the eating disorder did. And then later on, you will notice that your hair starts growing out again healthier, or you will notice that your digestive system after some time actually starts improving. So I mentioned the whole thing with like cognitive rigidity and how increasing your intake can make you less rigid, right? But another thing that I want to mention with increasing your intake is just that you're doing something that the eating disorder really fears, and you're really, being free, letting go. That in itself as well is really, really helpful in recovery. If you are looking at recovery or quote unquote being recovered as some kind of some kind of state where you constantly have to count, make sure you're not eating what you think is too much, you're constantly holding back, that's not really full recovery, right? If you're allowing yourself to increase your intake, you will notice that you can actually just eat whatever you want. You can eat freely, and you can, be free. You don't have to constantly think of your calorie intake as some kind of like budget, right? And this is why I always emphasize that in recovery, if you have, let's say, a goal of 3,500, that is a minimum, not a maximum. Please take note of that. Another benefit of eating more in recovery is that you tend to be a bit more free with food, right? So again, this kind of ties back to what I just said. If you're someone who's eating a low intake in recovery, let's say you're eating 2,000 calories, right? And you're terrified of going above that, then chances are food is still going to have a lot of power over you, right? You're going to be like, oh, I really want that pizza, but then I'm using up too many calories on my budget, and then you start freaking out. But if you're actually going into the mindset of eating more and realizing that food is an abundant resource, is something you can have, whenever you want, how much you want to, then you get a more free mindset around food. And also coming to a point where you are at your natural set point weight range, where you can eat what you want whenever you want, and still you will still stay in your set point weight range, because that is where your body wants to be. Instead of making it an equation where having that pizza, automatically your weight is just going to skyrocket. Like, that is an eating disorder belief. But if you're someone who's heavily restricting, then that could be the case, especially in early recovery. But that is because you're metabolically suppressed. So I know that now that I've spoken about, reasons to increase in recovery, I know 100% there's going to be a lot of you who are thinking, oh damn, I recovered on a low intake, or I'm in recovery and I've been eating a low intake for some time. I blew it. Damn it. Please. Okay, deep breath here. Deep breath. It is not too late to increase your intake. Yes, it's a nice thing to do that early on, but a lot of us haven't been aware of that early on. Like, how can you do something you're not aware of? Or maybe you were aware, but you just didn't do it because the eating disorder was like, nope. Please don't panic. It's not too late to increase your intake. I work with clients all the time who've gone through recovery and they've recovered on a lower intake, and now they notice that they still have strong symptoms of starvation, for instance, rigidity, food rules, being scared of going above a certain intake, or just physical symptoms of starvation, like maybe they're feeling cold, or maybe they haven't gotten their period back if they menstruate, or maybe they have all of those things sorted, but they just notice that they still feel rigid, they still feel like they're holding themselves back. And increasing your intake is still possible. Actually, it's still absolutely necessary. It's not too late. When you feel like, oh, it's too late, doesn't apply to me, that is the eating disorder holding you back. And equally, I can guarantee you that someone who's in early recovery, they literally say the same thing. That they say like, oh no, it's too soon for me to increase. No, I'm going to increase later, and they never do it, right? So it's like your eating disorder will always find a reason why it doesn't apply to you, right? It does still apply to you. I get so many people asking me, and they give me their like story or situation, and like, does it still apply to me? And I don't think yet I have ever said, no, it doesn't apply to you. Literally every single time it applies. And the reason why it applies is because eating freely, non-restricted, is something that pretty much every human needs, right? It's something that it's not something that only a few people deserve, right? It's the norm is to eat intuitively and freely. Maybe there exists the occasional exception, maybe someone who has some rare stomach condition where they can only eat X amount in X time, or they have, again, like, yeah, I don't want to like dismiss that there are cases where, complete unrestricted free eating is not something that someone can do, right? And also I understand not everyone has access, right? Not everyone, for instance, if someone is living in poverty, they might not have that access, right? I understand there is nuance, right? But my point is, for the vast majority of people who have that access and who don't have any significant medical condition that prevents them from eating what they want whenever they want, then not restricting is something that applies, right? You shouldn't restrict. That's the thing, right? And I know our society paints restriction as some kind of like normalized thing and some kind of like thing that everyone should just do a bit of, but that's not really the case, right? Especially not if you're someone with a past of an eating disorder, because then you are pretty much allergic to restriction. You deserve food freedom. You deserve to let go of any restrictive behaviors and let your body find its natural set point weight range. Increasing your intake in recovery is a wonderful thing. It gives you so many added benefits mentally and physically. And even if you haven't done it yet, it's not too late. You can do it now. Okay, guys, I'm now going to answer a listener question. So the question goes, Hi, Amalie, it is name censored. And I have a listener question, which is insomnia and eating disorder recovery due to periods still not coming back and hormonal imbalance. I've been in recovery for nearly 6 months now, and I lost my period for a little over a year. And I would like to know if perhaps I may be doing something wrong in my recovery and what I could possibly eat or do to get my period back, aka balance my hormones for a better night's sleep. I cut out cardio, but I still lift weights. So first of all, it is a little bit difficult for me to answer these things when it's someone I don't work with. Like I can give very like generalized advice in terms of periods, in terms of sleep, but I don't know everyone's individual situation, right? So the answer I will give would be more of a generalized one about what do you do when you haven't gotten your period back in recovery, and what do you do if you're struggling with your sleep in recovery. That's essentially what I'm answering, right? So in general, when someone have not gotten their period back, I tend to recommend to cut out all exercise, including weightlifting. I know, eating disorder is like, oh God. But stopping all exercise until period is back can be quite beneficial, right? And if you notice that it is a part of you that it feels nervous about doing that, nervous about actually cutting out the exercise, then that's also a big sign that you should do it. Please note that this does not mean that if you are someone who menstruates and you have your period, you should totally exercise. That's not what I'm saying at all. A break from exercise is important if it is a problem for you regardless, right? But if you're someone who lost your period and you're trying to get it back, then actually taking a break from exercise could be helpful. So if you say that your insomnia is due to the period not coming back and hormonal imbalance, and I hear you on that, but in general, insomnia and recovery is pretty common. And of course, there can be different reasons to it. People have insomnia for all sorts of reasons. But in general, what I've seen is that when people are increasing their intake and increasing their rest in recovery and also allowing their body to get to their natural set point weight range, the sleep quality tends to improve, right? This I see reported from my clients over and over. So again, generalized advice, because I don't know enough about you to go in and prescribe you exact behaviors, and that also wouldn't kind of be responsible for me. But in general, for a person in recovery who haven't gotten their period back and they notice their sleep is funny and they're still exercising, I would say rest up and increase your intake and see if that helps. And of course, if you come to a point where you're like, wait, my period is still not back, this is strange, or like your sleep, you're thinking could it be non-eating disorder related, of course talk to a doctor. But overall, what I see is that having issues with sleep and hormones and period is very common, and very often more rest, more food, and allowing your body to settle at its set point weight range can be very helpful. There is a bit of a thing with people in recovery where they're thinking because they have, for instance, cut out cardio, like, oh, I'm not running anymore, and then they're doing this and that and doing this and that. They're doing, for instance, they're still lifting weights, they're doing yoga, or they're doing walking, They think that they're not exercising, but they actually are. Like, weightlifting is exercise. That's like proper exercise, right? That is not rest. But physical factors aside, if you notice that, like I said it earlier, but I say it again, if you're someone who's exercising, whether you have period or no period or whatsoever, if you notice that the thought of taking a break from that exercise, whether that is taking a break from walking, weightlifting, running, even yoga or meditation for that sake, right? If you notice that taking a break from these things make you anxious, then chances are you should probably take a break from it. Things such as, let's say, yoga, right, or stretching is not necessarily something that physically will like seriously harm your body. But again, if it's anxiety driven, OCD like driven, then it could be a very good idea to take a break from it. So maybe reflect on that, and in your case, it could have physical benefits as well, potentially. So yeah, I hope that answered. I know that was like more of a generalized answer, but overall, there is a lot of things that become a lot better with rest, weight restoration. Again, not talking specific 1 BMI, I'm talking more like in your set point weight range, and just more food, like food, rest, repeat, food, rest, repeat. I know that seems like simplified because I do understand there's so much more to recovery, but I'm saying that those are key ingredients. They're not the only ingredients, but they are part of the key ingredients of the recipe we call recovery. Okay, guys, I hope this was helpful. And in general, if you do struggle with sleep or hormones and you're thinking, well, I wonder if this could be something else going on, of course, do talk to a doctor, right? But if you're someone who coincidentally is, exercising, restricting, suppressing your weight, then taking that out of the equation can be very helpful. And that can also make you go to the doctor and knowing that you've already taken that out of the equation, right? So then you can, if there is something going on, then you can figure that out. I will also add that in recovery, it can sometimes take a little bit of time to get your period back. It doesn't always happen, overnight. It can take a few months. That is normal. But if you notice that it's like months are passing and it's not happening, it could also be worth investigating a bit in your behavior if you're actually allowing your body enough energy and rest to get your period back. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you guys have a lovely, lovely week.